in him, framing each sentence in his mind before giving it utterance. "I reckon, Judge, you and I have had some 4 or 5 talks, that is, not counting Saturday evening and yesterday at Sloanehurst. That's about the extent of our acquaintance. That right?" "Why, yes," Wilton said, surprised by the change of topic. "I mention it," Hastings explained, "to show how I've felt toward you. You interested me. Excuse me if I speak plainly, you'll see why later on, but you struck me as worth studying, deep. And I thought you must have sized me up, catalogued me one way or the other. You're like me, waste no time with men who bore you. I felt certain, if you'd been asked, you'd have checked me off as reliable. Would you?" "Unquestionably." "And, if I was reliable then, I'm reliable now. That's a fair assumption, ain't it?" "Certainly." The judge laughed shortly, a little embarrassed. "That brings me to my point. You'll believe me when I tell you my only interest in this murder is to find the murderer, and while I'm doing it, to save the Sloanes as much as possible from annoyance. You'll believe me also when I say I've got to have all the facts if I'm to work surely and fast. You recognize the force of that, don't you?" "Why, yes, Hastings." Wilton spoke impatiently this time. "Fine." The old man shot him a genial glance over the steel-rimmed spectacles. "That's the introduction. Here's the real thing. I've an idea you could tell me more about what happened on the lawn Saturday night." After his involuntary, immediate start of surprise, Wilton tilted his head, slowly blowing the cigar smoke from his pursed lips. He had a fine air of reflection, careful thought. "I can elaborate what I've already told you," he said finally, "if that's what you mean. Go into greater detail." He watched closely the edge of the detective's face, unhidden by his bending over the wood he was cutting. "I don't think elaborations could do much good," Hastings objected. "I referred to new stuff. Some fact or facts you might have omitted, unconsciously." "Unconsciously?" Wilton echoed the word, as a man does when his mind is overtaxed. Hastings took it up. "Or consciously, even," he said quickly, meeting the other's eyes. The judge moved sharply, bracing himself against the back of the chair. "What do you mean by that?" "Skilled in the law yourself, thoroughly familiar with the rules of evidence, it's more than possible that you might have reviewed matters and decided that there were things which, if they were known, would do harm instead of good, obscure the truth, perhaps, or hinder the hunt for the guilty man instead of helping it on. That's clear enough, isn't it? You might have thought that?" The look of sullen resentment in the judge's face was unmistakable. "Oh, say what you mean," he retorted warmly. "What you're insinuating is that I've lied." "It don't have to be called that." "Well, then, that I, a judge, sworn to uphold the law and punish crime, have elected to thwart the law and to cheat its officials of the facts they should have. Is that what you mean?" "I'll be honest with you," Hastings admitted, unmoved by the other's grand manner. "I've wondered about that, whether you thought a judge had a right to do a thing of that sort." Wilton's hand, clenched on the edge of the desk, shook perceptibly. "Did you think that, Judge?" the detective persisted. The judge hesitated. "It's a point I've never gone into," he said finally, with intentional sarcasm. Hastings snapped his knife blade shut and thrust the piece of wood into his pocket. "Let's get away from this beating about the bush," he suggested, voice on a sterner note. "I don't want to irritate you unnecessarily, Judge. I came here for information, stuff I'm more than anxious to get. And I go back to that now. Won't you tell me anything more about the discovery of the woman's body by the two of you, you and Webster?" "No, I won't. I've covered the whole thing, several times." "Is there anything that you haven't told? Anything you've decided to suppress?" Wilton got up from his chair and struck the desk with his fist. "See here, Hastings, you're getting beside yourself. Representing Miss Sloane doesn't warrant your insulting her friends. Suppose we consider this interview at an end. Some other time, perhaps—" Hastings also had risen. "Just a minute, Judge," he interrupted, all at once assuming the authoritative air that had so amazed Wilton the night of the murder. "You're suppressing something, and I know it." "That's a lie," Wilton retorted, the flush deepening to crimson on his face. "It ain't a lie," Hastings contradicted, holding his self-control. "And you watch yourself. Don't you call me a liar again, not as long as you live. You can't afford the insult." "Then don't provoke it. Don't—" "What did Webster whisper to you across that corpse?" Hastings demanded, going nearer to Wilton. "What's this?" Wilton's tone was one of consternation. The words might have been spoken by a man stumbling on an unsuspected horror in a dark room. They stared at each other for several dragging seconds. The detective waved a hand toward the judge's chair. "Sit down," he said, resuming his own seat. There followed another pause, longer than the first. The judge's breathing was labored, audible. He lowered his eyes and passed his hand across their thick lids. When he looked up again, Hastings commanded him with unwavering, expectant gaze. "I've made a mistake," Wilton began huskily, and stopped. "Yes?" Hastings said, unbending. "How?" "I see it now. It was a matter of no importance, in itself. I've exaggerated it, by my silence, into disproportionate significance." His tone changed to curiosity. "Who told you about—the whispering?" The detective was implacable, emphasizing his dominance. "First, what was it?" When Wilton still hesitated, he repeated, "What did Webster say when he put his hand over your mouth, to prevent your outcry?" The judge threw up his head, as if in sudden resolve to be frank. He spoke more readily, with a clumsy semblance of amiability. "He said, 'Don't do that. You'll frighten Lucille.' I tried to nod my head, agreeing. But he misunderstood the movement, I think. He thought I meant to shout anyway. He tightened his grip. 'Keep quiet! Will you keep quiet?' he repeated 2 or 3 times. When I made my meaning clear, he took his hand away. He explained later what had occurred to him the moment Arthur's light flashed on. He said it came to him before he clearly realized who I was. I swear, Hastings, I hate to tell you this. It suggests unjust suspicions. Of what value are the wild ideas of a nervous man, all to pieces anyway, when he stumbles on a dead woman in the middle of the night?" "They were valuable enough," Hastings flicked him, "for you to cover them up, for some reason. What were they?" Wilton was puzzled by the detective's tone, its abstruse insinuation. But he answered the question. "He said his first idea, the one that made him think of Lucille, was that Arthur might have had something to do with the murder." "Why? Why did he think Sloane had killed Mildred Brace?" "Because she had been the cause of Lucille's breaking her engagement with Berne, and Arthur knew that. Arthur had been in a rage—" "All right," Hastings checked him suddenly, and getting to